Evan, thanks so much for joining me
Yeah,
today. I'm really excited to
yeah,
have you here and just share what it was like building the Good Rapport brand. We've known each other
yeah,
for about 2 years now because it has been
yeah.
a process of a lot of ups and downs. But before we kind of jump into Good Rapport, I would really love to just learn more about your background. There's a lot that I know, but there's a lot that could be shared for aspiring creative directors.
Sure. Basically have has taken a lot of different turns to end up where I am, but studied at Rhode Island School of Design. I majored in film, but it was also an amazing place to kind of try every medium and be surrounded by a lot of really talented people doing sculptures or doing sound design or doing animation or whatever it was. And so that was like a really important foundation for me, and I was able to start my own media production company while at school because I just had so many resources and people that were amazing to collaborate with, and so started to build the client base during school, and then continued on and opened an office in Brooklyn and ran that for a couple of years, and then worked for a larger agency where I got bigger exposure to bigger clients, and also got to start to work in events, which was a lot of the same components of film, but on steroids because it's live and really intense. Then did some work for a nonprofit, and then I met Stephanie and Suad, who are the co-founders of Stateless. Just really loved what they were doing. Just thought it was such a cool company. I just loved them, and they just are such amazing people. And kind of learned about what they do, which is building fashion brands. But at the time, they were only focused on the apparel portion. And I was talking to them. I was like, well, branding is really half the battle to starting a clothing company, and your story, your visuals, your identity, all of it. Maybe we could kind of work together to interweave the process of building product and building brands together into one business. And they loved the idea, and eventually I helped start the branding department, and now been doing that for about 8 years. And then somewhere in there I also started my own shoe brand, which was a great learning experience that I now can kind of bring to clients, and kind of gave me a lot of that firsthand experience of what goes into apparel. And I think that one of the big things for me, and why I kind of I worked in, for all different types of clients and businesses and projects, but ultimately what landed me with apparel and first inspiring me to want to start my own and then work with Stateless is an apparel brand can really be anything. It can be, Ralph Lauren has restaurants, and Tom Ford directs Academy Award winning movies. And, you think about like Nike immersive experiences, and there's no limit to what medium can be used. And there's no limit to how you can engage with a brand physically or digitally. And ultimately, I feel like apparel, more than most other industries, has the opportunity to form a really deep emotional connection with the customers. Certain other types of products like insurance, people aren't going to be as passionate about an insurance company the way they are about like Jordan brand or something like that, where they're lining up out the door, and some brands you kind of adopt as part of your identity. It kind of helps represent and express who you are, and just becomes so much more than a company in a lot of cases. And so I just love that about it. And so it kind of getting to kind of dip my toe into all these different spaces, it kind of was the perfect culmination of that experience to ultimately work in apparel.
Yeah. I love
Yeah.
what you just said at the end there as well, because I feel like that resonated so much with me and how I viewed good rapport as well, because I always viewed clothing as more. It's a way for people to either like collect and build community or advocate
Yeah.
for certain things that they're super passionate about, or there's just so much free space and blank space to take it into
Yeah.
different directions, which is very exciting to build that. But I would love to know, you kind of touched on this in your other response, but what are the skills that are most important to your current role?
Yeah, yeah. So I guess, yeah, I alluded to it earlier, just that it's really, really helpful to have hands-on experience with all of the different components that shape a brand. In my career and education, I've been the sound guy on a film shoot. I've designed apparel, I've dealt with manufacturers, I've been the graphic designer or web designer for technology companies, I've creative directed and produced events, and yeah, all these different pieces. I've been in that role. So then when you are directing people to do those different things, what goes into that job. So you're not being over demanding and causing friction with the people that you're collaborating with. And you kind of know the limitations and possibilities of that. And you also know how all of these different pieces can come together. Because ultimately, what I always like, I'm sure we talked about it, all the things that I preach all the time that makes a brand really successful is cohesion. It's like how all of these different pieces, how the packaging in the websites and the social media and events and the product, how that all comes together and forms a cohesive feeling. And to be able to creative direct that and make sure that that comes together cohesively, just having that hands-on experience, knowing intimately all those different components is really, really helpful.
That's such great insight. And now, kind of transitioning into Stateless, I would love to take the opportunity to tell more people about Stateless, the services that they offer, and the mission of the company, just in case they would like to learn more for themselves and reach out.
Yeah, absolutely. Stateless basically can work with brands at different stages. So a lot of what we do is like how we worked with Good Rapport is helping brands start from scratch. People come to us with great ideas and vision for the brand, but don't necessarily have the team or expertise to kind of bring product to market. And so much goes into that, and so much experience and a network is necessary. And so we end up being a really great solution for a lot of people looking to do that, by being able to surround them with the team that they need. So we have on the apparel side, we have a team of fashion designers, technical designers, production managers. We have a global network of manufacturers. And so we help clients set up their supply chain based on their particular product, price points, market, and then, kind of take their vision and help flesh out a line plan, sketches and all of it, and ultimately go through sampling and then into bulk production. That's the apparel side. And then the department that I run, for branding, we have graphic designers, writers, web developers, photographers, and we first kind of help shape the overall positioning and how you're going to stand out, how you're going to build community like you were talking about, how you're going to build a brand culture, and what's going to build that meaningful connection, like we were talking about. And from there, once that's like really thoroughly thought through, then that can be woven through both the apparel and all of your brand assets. So that's like logo, typography, color, your full sort of like very detailed brand system. And then the really essential assets you need to launch, like packaging, photo shoots for product photography, which you can do in a place like this. And then also lifestyle shoots where it's like kind of bringing your brand world to life, and then building a Shopify website to launch and sell your products. So yeah, it's a real kind of like soup to nuts experience. And then the client is kind of at the helm, kind of guiding the vision the whole time. And then ultimately, we also are really a big thing is making sure that clients feel prepared to be a apparel business owner. And so setting them up, like educating them and allowing them to potentially just kind of move on from us and build their own internal team eventually when it makes financial sense, and know all the terminology and things that they need to kind of direct all these different pieces and how to deal with manufacturers, all of that. So that's the sort of entrepreneur side. And then we also work with a lot of like bigger businesses where we are either consulting with our fashion or branding expertise, or we can plug in as an outsourced solution for maybe a bigger brand that wants to add an apparel department, or even like get into swimwear as a new product category. And rather than building out their own internal team, which is way more expensive, they can outsource with us, and we can add those products and be that extended team. So yeah, those are kind of all the components.
That's extremely helpful laying it out because I think too for people wanting to start their own brand and have not come from this world or this industry, there is so much that's unknown. And this is one of the best things that I can say about Stateless, and you mentioned it too, is that education component. I truly felt like you were there along the way. You gave me such grateful tips and insider information. And I did feel once the contract ended that I was ready to take the business post launch and continue growing on the path that we had laid out. So I'm glad that you mentioned it here in this response.
I really appreciate that. That's awesome. Yeah, that's the goal.
And now thinking through the two, or I guess three different sides of Stateless, but really two that I want to focus on of product and branding, maybe in the sense of good rapport and kind of the process that we went through. How do you think about the branding team working with the product team?
Yeah, so it's proven true, what Stephanie Suad and I talked about early on when we were talking about adding this department and how critical branding is to the process. It's really, especially for your launch collection should establish what your brand is about. Like customers should see those first few products and they should understand, okay, this is how this brand is different. This is what they're focused on. I am their target demographic, and that's clear from what they're offering. Because sometimes you might want to, like, I don't know, build in stages or do too much initially as well. Like you look at like a brand like Skims, like they started, it was very clear that it's shapewear. And then now they offer, sweatshirts and various different sort of other types of products. But they first really made it clear at the beginning their specialty, what was different about them, and then kind of built off of that. And so we really try to think about that because that's a product and brand strategy together. And then as you start to kind of develop everything, you want to make sure, color palette wise, brand, like how the logo works, and whether it's on the inside or outside of the garment, like all of those different sort of components are thoughtful and make sense together and don't feel slapped together. And then also logistically, just practically, there's just certain milestones that you have to hit for developing both of these things simultaneously. So you need your logo and your typography and all of that finalized before you can do your label system and hang tags and things like that on your product. And you need your salesman samples to be ready by the time you're doing your photo shoot. And you need to know all the product and care information to put on the website. There's so much back and forth that we find when clients are trying to do these things separately with separate companies, it can be fairly disjointed. And then also now Stateless has helped support over 150 brands. Like there's just so much knowledge that we can gain and through all sorts of trial and error and seeing what works and what doesn't work, where a lot of times other branding agencies are just, they don't really specialize in fashion specifically. They just kind of work, on any kind of brand. And there's just fashion is unique. There's a lot of unique challenges and considerations. So we try to really lean into that.
It really is. And I love that you mentioned Skims. It's a company that I've tracked during my venture capital investing tenure. And
Mm-hmm.
when I look at like CPG investing, sometimes the term of like a hero product comes up.
Yes.
And I
Yes.
think of that in relation to Skims as they started with shapewear, but now they do so many more things than just shapewear. Would that be a piece of advice that you would give to new brand owners to find out what you want your hero fashion garment to be, really ace
Yeah.
and go out from there?
Absolutely, that for sure. So like you starting with your suit, like I feel like that's such a core thing that you can return to over and over again throughout the lifetime of your brand. But I think it basically, I obviously the apparel department people can speak way more intelligently to, how to think about a hero product, but I think that that equivalent also applies to your brand. So like it's basically they're both part of the same conversation of what are you doing to clearly establish how you're unique and different? Maybe it's you're tapping into a niche community of people that really love a particular sport, let's say. It's finding that like that unique angle and positioning, and then the hero product is like one of the byproducts of that. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think the way that you framed it was way better than I could do, and such a great way to position it to help people think about how do all of these components kind of work together. Because when you are at the start of the process of developing a brand, there's so much you have to think about that sometimes you just don't even know where to start.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we try to make it a little easy of building it in stages. So if you try to think about it all at once, it becomes overwhelming. But yeah, that if you just start with that positioning statement of, what's your differentiator? Why are people going to care about your brand? And then what's your mission of your brand? What are you looking to achieve with the company? Then all of those, you put a lot of thought into that, all the decisions become easier from there. So coming up with a brand name, for example, even becomes a lot easier once you've established that positioning. So you knew community was super important to you, and focusing on this sort of like untapped area of the women's business world, and this particular type of customer,
Mhm.
and how they can all feed off of each other to build each other up and to like become successful together. So you knew that going in, that was the most important thing to you. So then a name like Good Rapport is just a natural representation of that idea. And then everything else that we did also is just like a natural representation of it. And so the decision making becomes so easy once you've done that work at the beginning.
Yeah. And you're right. Stateless does a great job, even though there's a lot of things to think about, in breaking that up into bite-sized pieces for the client and kind of going through a very specific process flow. Maybe in the terms of good rapport, I know you kind of were already touching on this, but maybe it would be helpful to just kind of like outline like the key milestones that we went through.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so after that positioning conversation, then on the branding side, it's naming, and then your sort of core brand assets. So your logo. But as you'll see, for your customers going through your website and social media, there's a lot of different sort of pieces within that logo. So we think about icon, we think about monogram, we think about type mark, how they play off of each other, how the icon then informs like a pattern. So there's like a repeating version of your icon that becomes your distinct pattern, that can be used in all sorts of ways. And then we get into your typography, your overall brand system. So we end up delivering a brand guide that's like close to 40 pages long, where we spell out not only the logo, core messaging, these like main elements that we start with. We then also flesh out what's your approach to photography, all of these different sort of pieces, that how you're maintaining a consistent brand voice. So when anyone is either designing, shooting, or writing on behalf of your brand, they can refer to this document, they can refer to all the work that you've put into thinking about it, to know how to do it quickly and cohesively. And like we talked about earlier, cohesion is the name of the game. So doing all that work, spelling out all these different components in detail is really helpful. And then from there, we dive into packaging, and all the different sort of packaging pieces that you might need. So for you, there's a major emphasis on sustainability. So we talk through all of those different considerations and giving people things that they can reuse, like a garment bag,
Mhm.
as part of the purchase. And then from there, product photography. So what kind of is the white background, on the e-commerce portion of your website. And then also a lifestyle shoot where we, shot the garments on models in context that kind of reflected the character of the mood board that we established early on. And then all of it comes together with the website, where all of the content, copy, and product information, everything all comes together with that. And then getting you set up to actually run that business and fulfill orders from home. And then eventually you can scale into connecting it to a distribution center.
Yeah, that was perfect. It was a great summary. And that brand guidelines deck, I have been living in it every single
Oh, great.
in that document, looking at all the
Awesome.
information that you've aggregated. It is the most helpful document, especially
Great.
someone who is the only employee within their business doing so many different things.
Yeah.
Day of the first lifestyle brand shoot,
Yeah.
I ended up
Oh man.
getting deathly, not almost deathly, but extremely sick
Yeah.
and having to
Yeah.
actually miss the first lifestyle shoot. And through that entire process, it really emphasized for me how having the right creative team in place is really a game changing decision. And I would love to elaborate on that because I was so thankful and grateful that you were there able to run everything that day and I didn't need to be there and I could just be home recovering and trying to get better.
Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate that. And it was so sad because the being on set for your first photo shoot is seeing your baby come to life. And it's just, it was just so sad that you missed that experience. But a lot of the time, yeah, there's so much preparation that goes into it that on set, you're not necessarily doing a whole lot as the founder because you've done so much work. I was basically an extension of your brain and knowing what you wanted and what your brand was about. And so it could happen pretty seamlessly. So yeah, I mean, I think that obviously you having, going through the work of having clear vision, but also for other founders, surrounding yourself with the right people that can help you clarify that vision is also really important. And then people that just know what they're doing to execute is also amazing. Like people, I think, underestimate what goes into something like graphic design. Like we always say for a logo, we might end up delivering something that, yeah, technically you could have done yourself. And maybe we even did that iteration of that logo in 10 minutes, but it's not 10 minutes. It's decades of experience and work that went into prepare us to execute that in that 10 minutes. And so that level of experience is just bringing that to as many components of your business as possible is always going to put you in a better position for success.
Yeah, it's great. And the lifestyle shoot ended up coming out so well. And you're so right, Evan. I remember probably that month leading up to the actual shoot, we were meeting every week, sometimes multiple times a week, just to make sure everything was in place so that come even the walkthrough that we did the day before, it was
Right.
seamless, it was smooth, we could do it really quickly. So
Okay.
I've loved recently flexing my creative muscle, and I'm curious, in what ways do you enhance your creative skill set?
Yeah, I think for me, it's at this point, it's more creative knowledge than it is like practicing a skill in the same way. Because early on, it's like, trying my hand at cinematography and doing that over and over again and learning all I can about it. And technology is always changing. So learning tools like cameras and how they evolve is really helpful. But and even with your phone, I guess while we're on that subject, with your phone, just being aware of all the settings that you have because content is so important. So any founder should be constantly shooting stuff as much as they possibly can in any that obviously it needs to work for your brand, needs to meet the standards of quality for your brand, but phones are now so incredible, but your default settings aren't necessarily the best possible settings, and so staying on top of that kind of thing and knowing now you can set it to be shooting in raw instead of the default, which is a bigger file size. You can do more in editing with that. And so like that's a recent thing that I've just been learning about to make sure that anytime I'm shooting something with a phone, I'm maximizing, what that can be. So it's research and then playing with that, whatever that thing is that you've researched. And then the other type of thing along those lines is staying on top of AI is, it's critical to every industry now, but really in the creative field, just staying on top of how it can be leveraged. Using ChatGPT, sure, maybe to write some copy here and there, but also like what are the limits of AI currently? So like what are ways that we know we can't lean on it? What are ways we can? And just always kind of staying up to date with how that's evolving it's not necessarily a skill set, but it's critical to staying sharp and staying on top of and doing what I do as best as I can. And then I guess the other thing is just that if maybe you're earlier on in your careers, like I was saying earlier, just trying your hand at everything. And I think a lot of times the more classic path towards what I do now is starting as a graphic designer. And usually agencies are hiring someone as a graphic designer and then or a writer, and then they ultimately get promoted to creative director. Coming as a filmmaker is a little bit more unusual, but so I then had to learn the graphics and the writing and all of that side to ultimately catch up. But if you're going that more traditional path, learn filmmaking, learn photography, because content is king. And so you might have the graphic part down, but ultimately a website is only really as good as its photography. You can have great design and great copy, but if your photos are gross, like then it's just not going to be successful. So if you want to be the creative director where you're overseeing all of those pieces, you should really know what goes into photography and have a good amount of experience with the different components of a set, and doing those pieces yourself, whether it's lighting or whether it's being behind the camera or even being in front of the camera. I've had plenty of experience acting and things like that to know what challenges are faced by someone that's being photographed so that I can direct them better.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that because I think oftentimes when you're young, just starting off in your career, you have such a rigid way of viewing your career path and think that you have to follow certain exact steps at certain times. But I'm learning that that's not the case. You're reiterating it and saying that that's not the case. But what is really important is getting yourself out there, getting those skills in all different facets. So when you do get
Yeah,
that position, you're skilled in like every component. And not
yeah.
to put you on the spot, but you did mention an interesting topic. In what ways do you think AI would impact branding?
Well, first, just to speak to the apparel side, which is really interesting, there are platforms like Midjourney and Resleeve and things like that where you can kind of give a prompt and it will create an example of the clothing for you. It is not perfect by any means yet. It is not going to give you something that you can then go and make a sample of. It is not, but what's really amazing about that is being able to express an idea that doesn't currently exist because it can blend things. Basically, like my shoe company is blending basketball sneakers with traditional Italian made dress shoes. And so if I had had that technology at that time, I could have started to show people what I was talking about in a realistic looking form. I can tell it, combine this Jordan sneaker with this Italian dress shoe, and it can spit out something that is, interesting. And it can also spit out something that you didn't expect that could maybe guide you in a different direction. So that as just part of the general exploration phase, I think is really great. And that also, it applies to apparel. It also applies to maybe logo generation. So for one of our clients right now, we are using AI to create more like three-dimensional, interesting shapes and things that are much harder to do by hand. And so, and then what's important there is like every time you see the logo, it's a little bit different, which is cool to have a dynamic logo sometimes. But what are the parameters of that, and what are the prompts that you're giving the AI to do that somewhat consistently? So basically, we're building into brand guidelines. Okay, this is the prompt that you give it every time to get something consistent. And if you are using ChatGPT for your copywriting, what is the direction that you're giving it to shape and follow your voice? So, and there are also tools specifically, like we work with this company called Cassidy that really learns your company, and you can feed it all these documents and like brand guides and things like that, and it learns your specific voice and learns what your company is about. And so it's a way more informed output ultimately that you don't have to give as much direction to. Whereas like if you just do a chat GPT prompt from scratch, on like OpenAI's, main platform, you're kind of starting from scratch as far as what it knows about you. So looking into these different platforms that can start to learn you, which is scary in a lot of ways, but it's also really, really useful. There's still a lot that needs to be done manually, needs to have experience, because ultimately what it's doing, this is a really important thing, is it can combine, if you are creative enough to ask it to combine two things that haven't been combined before, it can do that. But otherwise, what it's doing is drawing from existing things, drawing from existing imagery in the case of Midjourney, or drawing from existing content in the case of ChatGPT, or existing sort of like best practices, as far as like how to write a blog article or whatever. But what it doesn't do is have original thought. And so as much as humans are capable of being original, so you still need to bring that to the table if you're giving it a prompt. And that, so I think that that's, we still have a leg up there for now.
Yeah, and that could be a challenging line to toe too, as you start to think about like how does copyright law now start to take effect with all of these new
Oh yeah.
technologies that are coming out. I think it's going to be an interesting topic for us to watch and observe and see how this grows. But after now getting a very
Yeah.
inside look into the brand development process, I agree with you that yes, there's always going to be the need for an expert to be in the room.
Yeah. Hopefully always.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Evan, I'm so glad that you could join us today. I think this is a very important conversation to have, and I love sharing the behind the scenes on what it has been like building good rapport to this point. I'm glad that we could share this experience with everyone else, but then also let them know about what it's like to be a creative director, but what it's also like to work at a company like Stateless. I'm glad that you are now and have been since the beginning a friend of Good Rapport. So, do you have any just last words before we part?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I'm most proud of with Good Rapport, um, which I can't take credit for, our copywriter did it, but based on all the thinking that we had done of like what was important to you. Ultimately, the tagline "Work in Progress." I just love that so much, and I feel like it really encapsulates everything that you're doing. And like just even this interview, we're talking about the work that we do, but also how can we make progress? How can we help, impart, our experience onto other people that, want to do similar things, or just, how the world is evolving for things like AI. It's just like the doing the work, being committed to that, and then also having this priority of progress. Or we also like that it can be work in progress as well. It can be noun or verb or whatever. And so I just feel like I'm really proud of us as a team, like landing on that, and then that you came to us with such a great vision for something that was easy to believe in and get excited about. And also, we are only as good as the taste of our clients. Ultimately, I feel like you have impeccable taste and just helped guide what we think is a really beautiful brand in the end. And so it's really amazing to see it to come together. And then it's so fun to watch like your social media and everything as you are really like putting it into action. And I'm glad you're using the brand guide. That's amazing. And it's like it's all like looking so great. And yeah, really, really happy to be a part of it.
Thanks so much, Evan. Those brand guidelines have literally been like my Bible for every.
Awesome.
I reference it for every need that I have. Thank you so much for joining us today and sitting down to
Yeah.
talk. I'm sure we're going to want to sit down and talk again soon as like the business starts to enter a new phase. And I'm looking forward to working again soon.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I'll talk to you soon.